Daily is king. And any argument to this is wrong. Don't spend $1,000 on lab tests before just trying to do daily injections. And if you're not willing to do that, at least for a trial, I would be arguing that your side effects aren't that bad. We're going to talk about shit protocols. And shit protocols are the bane of my existence, because this is the easiest thing for practitioners to get right. Everything I mentioned before is much more complicated in terms of patient compliance. It's much more complicated in terms of a much broader knowledge base being required. This is simple. So testosterone must be injected as often as the patient is willing to do it. Daily is king. And any argument to this is wrong. When we look at testosterone, there are things that people get wrong because they don't intrinsically understand pharmacokinetics or the studies that they are reading. And by reading, I mean Googling and glancing at the abstract. Firstly, testosterone enanthate and cypionate do not have a half-life of a week. They have a half-life of under 5 days. They have a mean residence time of 7 to 10 days. But the important thing to understand about pharmacokinetics is people say that if you do a fortnightly or weekly or twice a week injection of testosterone, after 8 weeks, you will reach what's called a steady state. This does not mean a flat line. Steady state means that the levels stay within a therapeutic range as defined by what that therapeutic range is, meaning that they're going to be fluctuating up and down, but not crashing through a therapeutic floor. The problem that we have in this movement is the variability, because testosterone's therapeutic effects and the lack of side effects, whether people agree with this or not, it is simply the truth, come from stability. If you ask any woman, she will tell you that hormone fluctuations are not conducive for her mental health. They are not conducive for any aspect of a man's health. Even if you want to argue about the natural diurnal rhythm of testosterone, you cannot mimic that, because the level of it being mimicked is a very small fluctuation, and the pharmacokinetic mimicking would need to start at midnight. So daily injections actually do lead to a natural slight fluctuation in levels because of these pharmacokinetic peaks. So just like caffeine has a half-life of 8 hours, it doesn't have a gradual increase at up to 4 hours and then a gradual decrease in the desired effects. So when you have a cup of coffee, the effects you're looking to achieve are not gradually building for 4 hours and then gradually tapering off over 8 hours. This is because caffeine peaks much earlier than the middle of the half-life. So when we are looking to stabilize androgen levels, which is what confers the best therapeutic outcomes, especially in the instance of resolving side effects, daily injections. The way to make daily injections easier is to use a 29 gauge insulin syringe into the deltoid. Subcutaneous injections are not reliable. Intramuscular injections work 100% of the time. There are hundreds of thousands of diabetic little girls who do a daily injection of insulin into the subcutaneous fat just to survive. You, as a full-grown adult looking to optimize their androgen levels, can do the same thing into the deltoid. Scar tissue is not an issue when you're using a tiny little needle, and the patience of doing this as part of your daily routine, if you are dealing with side effects especially, has a massive reward profile to it. Now, a lot of people get away with 3 times a week injections. And if you're not having side effects, I don't know why you're still watching this video, but most people who are watching this are watching it because they're troubleshooting. I used to sell mobile phones when I was at university, and it was back in the day before, phones were this all-in-one thing that we have now, back when you could take the battery out. And when people would come in with a problem with their phone, the first thing we'd ask them, and if people are, as old as me or a bit older, we'd say, have you tried taking the battery out and turning it off and back on again? This is a hard reset. This would basically reset any software bugs. And most of the time, issues with the phone, unless you dropped it, back before they were waterproof, maybe you dropped it in the pool or put it through the washing machine, I don't know. But most of the issues could be resolved with a hard reset. Now, if it didn't resolve that, then we had to send it off for repair and further issues. But increasing injection frequency is like doing a hard reset. It doesn't solve everything, but it's the easiest thing for you to do first before seeing if other areas need to be investigated. Don't spend $1,000 on lab tests and come and spend an hour with me or an hour with someone else and do all these investigations and waste all this time on YouTube and blah, 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 before just trying to do daily injections. Yes, it's inconvenient, but once you get used to it, if you're doing something 3 times a week and having side effects, and you do the same thing 7 times a week and it resolves the issue, that is a worthwhile investment of your time. Plus, if you're doing it daily and you can use a 29 gauge instead of a 27 gauge, this tiny little pinprick is so comfortable and the process is so efficient that you can do it as part of your daily routine. And if you're not willing to do that, at least for a trial, I would be arguing that your side effects aren't that bad. So 3 times a week, people can get away with. Every other day, some people can get away with. Again, 3 times a week, every other day. If you're doing well on that, if you're thriving on that, then that is not a problem. But twice a week, I would argue, is the minimal amount that anyone should be looking at. But if you're having side effects, one of the best things that you can do that is free, that is easy, that is efficient, stabilize those levels and see if things improve. So if you're in the UK, you may be using Sustanon. I'm not a fan of Sustanon, but I'm also not a fan of how much TRT costs in the UK. I am under the impression, at least as of 2025, and it has been for the last 5 years, that Sustanon is orders of magnitude cheaper. I'm not talking about 20 or 30 bucks a month. I'm talking a tenth of the price. If that is a factor, you can make Sustanon work, but you have to do daily injections because of the presence of the propionate and phenylpropionate esters, meaning that it is going to be too unstable, not in terms of your levels crashing out to nothing, but having too much flux and variance in the levels to have stability. So if you're using Sustanon and you're having side effects, do it daily. If you are using Sustanon and you are not in the UK, or it is not the only form of testosterone that you can get, consider using cypionate or enanthate because it is more stable, and stability is very important for resolving side effects. But as I have said for this entire lecture, if there are other issues going on that are not related to the pharmacokinetics, meaning the movement of the hormone levels in your body, this is not going to solve the issue, but it may help to resolve some of the discomfort and side effects while you are working on or diagnosing the other issue. More stable hormones are going to be beneficial for any side effect scenario. Any argument to the contrary is wrong. Anyone who would like to debate that, please reach out to me. We can set up a discussion on it. I would love to be challenged on this point. So, compounded testosterone creams. Now, this is something that I have done a lot more work with. I've done a lot more practitioner education on since making this lecture. Compounded transscrotal creams need to ideally be applied twice a day and compounded in an increased bioavailability base, such as ideally the HRT base, also Versa, Atrivus, or liposomal. I prefer liposomal or HRT base. I find they work more consistently. A lot of people I work with use the Versa base and have no problems. A lot of people use the Atrivus base and have no problems. The HRT base is objectively the best. I find the liposomal absorbs better, has less residue left afterwards. Studies say that it isn't quite as good as Atrivus and Versa. In practice, the difference is negligible and the cream is often more available in terms of where you can get it, and it works very well. Regular commercial preparations of cream like Androforte or other shelf-based products are often far too low in concentration, and they often do not have enough bioavailability to increase levels to a therapeutic point. Now, once a day, people can get away with, but it is far from optimal because there is, again, too much transience in the levels. But because of more conversion to DHT and less conversion to aromatase, this does tend to be better tolerated, but it's far from ideal. Now, this is the point that I want to bring up here, which is more of a modern and nuanced approach that I have field tested with teams of over a dozen doctors in more than a dozen countries. is that if someone is having side effects related to any of the things I mentioned before, obesity, liver disease, chronic pain, hypothyroidism, creams, when used properly, i.e. 20% concentration or 15% concentration if someone's a hyperresponder, twice a day in a liposomal HRT base or Versa retrievers, because the testosterone goes directly into the bloodstream when applied to the scrotum and has increased presence of the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, this can actually replicate an environment that is more like that of a healthy man. Because if the liver is dysfunctional and the ester is not being metabolized properly, a lot of the problems that we have from over aromatizing in obese or inflamed patients is also a problem due to underproduction of the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. All of the issues that I mentioned before result in suppressed production of 5-alpha reductase, not just increased aromatase. So if we can use a form of testosterone which bypasses the liver, goes directly into the bloodstream, and has a more androgenic metabolism profile, I can say from experience, overseeing hundreds of these cases with men who would usually have side effects while we are resolving the root cause issue, that the cream delivers the results that is more in alignment with what a healthy man would have on injections. I have seen this. I have taught this. I have had a huge amount of practitioners come back to me and attest to this being true. It doesn't mean the cream is better. It doesn't mean that injections are better. It means that it is important for practitioners to have both options in the toolbox. And one thing that men can do if they're wanting to use injections for convenience or, for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter, it's your treatment, is to use the cream until the body fat percentage is healthy, until the liver issues have been resolved, until the habits have been resolved, and then swapping to injections and having them be better tolerated.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
So men in poorer health who have hypogonadism for longer periods prior to treatment will be more sensitive to the fluctuations in testosterone levels and need to administer the treatment more often. So to put it simply, everyone should inject daily, but the more unhealthy you are, the more of an emphasis on you have to inject more often to not have side effects. If you are unhealthy and have these problems that I mentioned before, and you do a twice a week injection protocol, you will have a much higher probability, again, not a guarantee, but a much higher probability of side effects. Now, when people are titrating their protocols, I recommend titrating by the minimal amount that you can measure on the syringe per injection. So if you're doing a daily injection with either a 200 milligram per mil or 250 milligram per mil, the titration increment on the 1 mil insulin syringe will be 4 or 5 milligrams per injection, meaning that if I don't really work with 200 milligram per mil because of the countries I'm in, so 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. So you're looking at about 28 to 35 milligrams per week of testosterone in titrations up and down. If you're doing 3 injections per week, that would be a 12 to 15 milligram amount for titrate. People will say, oh, well, that's not very much. It is much better to titrate in the minimal amount more frequently than a big jump. So for example, if someone did need double that amount of titration, it's better to titrate by the minimal amount for 12 to 16 weeks, review it, and then titrate by that point again so that the body can get used to these changes in androgens rather than overshooting it. Because a lot of the time, again, this is in practice, and I can tell you this from experience, is that sometimes it's not that the dose was too high, it's that you got there too quickly. So if someone's never drank coffee before, let's say they've never had more than 1 shot of espresso per day, and for some reason they're wanting to go up to, let's say, 3 shots of espresso per day, again, hypothetical. Going from 1 shot to 2 shots to 3 shots is going to be a better outcome than going straight to 3 shots, because it may not be that 3 shots is too much. It can be that 3 shots is too much straight away. And people need time for not just the subjective benefits of testosterone, but for the body to be able to adjust and accommodate around those changing hormone environments. Now, the other thing that's important is that levels can fluctuate up to 30%, maybe even a little bit more than that, even with daily injections. So if you are using the same testosterone product and you get your blood work every morning when you get it at 9 a.m., and you do your testosterone shot every day at, let's say, 9:30 a.m., for example, even with those ultra stable levels in your blood, your levels can and will fluctuate by 30% or maybe even a little bit more when you get your labs drawn. This is not a problem. This is because even though the amount of testosterone that you're administering is the same, the amount present in your blood will vary because, 1, the test is not pinpoint, but 2, the liver doesn't consistently metabolize the ester. It will vary based on the fact that the body is quite dynamic. So this is why it's important for practitioners to understand that the number on paper is a ballpark number. It's not a precise number. And if providers keep tweaking reactively based on the exact pinpoint number in the lab test, the patients are going to have an absolute nightmare of an experience. This is why symptoms and labs are important together in determining what to do with a protocol. So your protocol, you listening to this now, is based on what the optimal replacement dose is for you. We can't test, and maybe if you're watching this in the future, this has changed, but we can't test how many androgen receptors you have. We can't test how sensitive they are. And people could be watching this who are 19 years old. People could be watching this who are 80 years old. People could be watching this who are healthy athletes or morbidly obese alcoholics and everything in between. So comparing doses with other people, if they are not your identical twin with the exact health parameters as you, is like comparing apples to oranges. So for me personally, when I'm coaching doctors and working and overseeing doctors in my clinics, I prefer to start individuals on cream rather than injections if they are obese. And this is due to, as I said before, the increased DHT conversion and the decreased aromatase expression from this form of administration more being representative of what a healthy man would have on injections. And this leads to better outcomes. The only time that this does not work is if the individual doesn't properly absorb the cream, in which case daily injections with things like metformin and other ancillaries can absolutely work. Not everyone can get compounded HRT-based 20% testosterone cream. So my preference for injections, if possible, is an MCT-based oil. And in terms of if you're working with a pharmacy directly, the name for this can often be Migliol, which is like a commercial name for MCT. I prefer this for 2 reasons. One is that the MCT oil is thinner. It's the thinnest oil. If you compare this to like a commercial Primatest and castor oil on the other end of the spectrum, this is a very thick, viscous oil. It's like goo. This oil is closer to water. So that means that when you're drawing and injecting with a little tiny syringe, like a 29 gauge syringe, it's much more convenient and faster. Like just convenience is great. The other thing, though, is it's less immunogenic. And this is something I picked up in maybe 2021, 2022, and other colleagues of mine have also picked this up as well, because when you work with clients or patients at scale, the issues that come up 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 times come up multiple times a week or even multiple times a day. And a lot of people, and again, when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of people when you're dealing with thousands of men, I would estimate 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 can have an immunogenic reaction to some of these commercial oils or carrier oils. Whereas the MCT oil doesn't really seem to have a capacity for the immune system to respond negatively. So when people get flu-like symptoms, when people get swelling around the injection site, when they get increased acne, even though all their other health factors and hormone replacement therapy is optimal, one thing that people can look at, and practitioners should look at as well, is using an MCT-based oil. Many of the side effects that they experience when correcting this are due to the biological consequences of chronic inflammation. It's important to support and adjust the TRT and supplement protocol for the patient in terms of where they're at now, based on their different